Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carter.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carter, and today is May 27th, 2026, and tonight's episode is all about the last card from heaven, Apophis, Wormwood, and the fear economy. Now, for thousands of years, humanity feared the heavens. Ancient civilizations believed the sky carried warnings from God. Signs of judgment, the rise and fall of kingdoms, and the collapse of nations. Comets, eclipses, falling stars, and strange celestial events were viewed as messages tied directly to the fate of humanity itself. Well, modern civilization claims it has outgrown those fears through science and technology. Yet the emotional reaction never disappeared. It only changed form. Instead of priests reading omens, humanity now watches orbital trackers, asteroid alerts, satellite systems, and AI-driven threat analysts. Now, the heavens are no longer viewed as a spiritual territory. They are becoming infrastructure territory. Well, this broadcast examines why 99942 Apophis, which is an asteroid, became one of the most psychological, powerful celestial objects in the modern age. Named after the ancient Egyptian serpent of chaos and destruction, Apophis arrived in public consciousness during a time of growing instability across nearly every system on Earth. Wars, pandemics, cyberattacks, space militarization, collapsing institutional trust, and the rise of digital surveillance have created an environment where humanity increasingly expects some form of global event. Well, Apophis became more than an asteroid. It became a symbol. The closer civilization moves towards technological dependence, the more emotionally vulnerable society becomes to fear from above. Now, this show explores the biblical concept of wormwood from Book of Revelation and examines why the imagery of poisoned waters and judgment from heaven still resonates in the modern world. Rather than facing a literal interpretation, the broadcast investigates how wormwood may operate simultaneously as prophecy, archetype, psychological condition, and systems warning. Well, this discussion moves through ancient serpent symbolism, billionaire bunkers, planetary defense systems, global data economy driven by global data center expansion, and the rise of a modern fear economy driven by permanent crisis narratives. Now, from Cold War fear to terrorism, from pandemics to artificial intelligence, civilization appears increasingly conditioned to accept control during moments of existential uncertainty. This is not a show attempting to prove an asteroid strike or predict the end of the world. It is an examination of how prophecy, media, technology, psychology, and fear are beginning to merge into a single narrative environment. Humanity once feared dragons in the heavens. Now it fears orbital objects tracked by satellites and AI systems. Well, the symbols changed, but the emotional structure remained the same. The deeper question may not be whether a celestial object eventually strikes the Earth. The deeper question may be why modern civilization seems spiritually and psychologically prepared for something to fall from the sky. I'm looking forward to tonight's show. Shout out to everybody on the live chat rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion says, "Hey guys, happy to be here tonight with you all." Well, glad to have you here. Number two warrior is the Spark and Spleef Man Powder Room himself, Boots Hafner, stating, smoking up in the powder room. Damn mosquitoes. Hello, James and Warrior family. Hoping everyone is well. Let's all hit that thumbs up button. And don't forget to tell a friend about ElitePotion.com. Thank you. Well, thank you, Boots. Yeah, that's right. You know, I still sell this stuff. I don't know if you guys are interested anymore, but it really does work. Remove parasites and heavy metals. That's one of the major causes, or those are the major causes of modern diseases. And we also found out that, hey, nicotine and vitamin D tells the immune system to stop freaking out and stop inflaming itself. Well, isn't that funny? We did a show on that last night. So thanks for reminding me. Guys, ElitePotion.com. Get your supplements, okay? They work. I'm on them. I feel great. And also, yeah, if you could all do me a favor. You see, this show doesn't run on how many people watches it. It runs on how many likes I can get. So I really need you guys to do me a favor and follow my thumb down to your phone, just like I'm doing. Hit the X button, then hit thumbs up, and then hit live chat. You're not going to lose your spot, I promise. Unfortunately, Rumble only likes or thumbs up instead of how many people watch this thing. So, Boots, thanks for the reminder. Philip Del Piano is the third warrior saying hello, everyone, with the peace sign, the prayer sign, and America flag. And number 4 warrior is Jeffrey. Jeffrey says, hey, James, news has been silent. Thus, for me, I think something is brewing. It's not silent. It just keeps going. And yeah, as we will find out from tonight's breaking news, it's, again, all a bunch of bullshit. But thanks for being here. Philip says, James, Scorpion Boots after waving to them. Jeffrey says, and everything is super expensive. I can't even afford a pot to piss in. That's an old timer saying. Yep, that's what the old timers would say. Scorpion follows that with, I had to start my an OnlyFans selling feet pics just to pay the utilities. You know, I don't think he's lying. I think he really did. People they do weird things too. Weird things. You know, I don't, but people do. All right, guys, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
Now, U.S. military carries out new strikes in Iran. All right. So it's just not going to stop for a while. Justice Department is said to open criminal inquiry of E. Jean Carroll over Trump lawsuits. There's so many lawsuits out there. It's unbelievable. Longview paper mill disaster could be deadliest industrial tragedy in modern history. Well, Washington, if your budget was all screwed up and you needed cash right away, great job. You're going to get your emergency funding from the feds and you're not going to have to pay it back. That's how it works. And that's how tragedies begin, by greed. Republicans brace for money problems in Texas after Ken Paxton's win. Oh, money problems in Texas. Well, don't they have enough oil to not have to worry about any of that? I wouldn't worry too much about Texas. I worry about the poor people in Texas. They're the ones with the money problems, and it's because of the leadership in Texas. It's all states. 35 former judges asked court to investigate Trump's deal with the IRS. Investigate former judges. They're not judges. They're just former. And they're asking, investigate Trump's deal with the IRS. Well, the deal with the IRS doesn't need much investigation. It's pretty simple. They released his tax records. That's illegal. That's like a really bad thing to do. And gave it to the press. Trump caught him, found the evidence, sued him, won, and now he's putting that money, $1.8 billion, to help all those people who are wrongfully put in prison for politics. And these 35 former judges, I would assume, are all leftist judges, these former judges, because, hey, they're mad. Well, I've warned you leftist for a long time, and I'm not a leftist or rightist. I'm not even in the middle. I'm nowhere near it. I don't like politics. Politics means to control a group of people. But leftists, I warned you in my show a long time ago. You poked the bear. And you went full on arresting the guy in New York City, payback's a bitch. He's coming after y'all. So whatever you do, you ain't going to win. I would just let it go and focus all of your money and energy into the presidency of 2028. David Rush, ex-U.S. government official, arrested after $40 million in gold bars are found in his home. Why would you be arrested for gold bars? Well, I don't know, but 40 million in gold bars? Cool. I mean, hey, I would like to see that in my house. And that's breaking news. All right, guys, when we come back, we're going to be doing the show on the last card from heaven, Apophis, Wormwood, and the fear economy. Get ready, because we're all going to die.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
Have you ever filed a tax return? Yes.
Nobody. Not one. It starts at 16. That first job, that first form. The moment they became a taxpayer. Every April 15th, millions keep signing the same contract, thinking it's the law. But it isn't the law that binds them. It's the signature. 98% of Americans never owed it. Learn more at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back. You guys scared? New Year's coming? We're all going to die. Well, you wouldn't have to be scared if you had your full trust and hope and faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Well, good evening, everyone. And welcome to Cause Before Symptom, where we do not chase symptoms. We test the cause against scripture, history, systems, and observable reality. Well, tonight's conversation is not really about an asteroid. It's about fear. It's about why modern civilization suddenly feels emotionally prepared for something catastrophic to come from the heavens while billionaires build bunkers underground, governments militarize space, corporations construct planetary data systems, and humanity itself loses trust in nearly every institution surrounding it. Well, for thousands of years, mankind looked upward with awe and terror. Ancient civilizations believed the sky carried messages from God. Comets were like warnings. Eclipses were omens. Falling stars meant judgment. Kings dying, nations collapsing, and entire civilizations entering a new stage of uncertainty. Priests studied the heavens. Kings consulted astronomers. Entire empires feared what appeared above them at night. The heavens were not viewed as empty space. They were viewed as divine territory. Then came the scientific age. Telescopes replaced temples. Astronomy replaced mythology. Mathematics replaced omens. Humanity convinced itself it had evolved beyond fear of the sky. We learned orbital mechanics. We mapped the planets. We calculated trajectories. We placed satellites above the earth and began treating the heavens not as a spiritual territory, but as a infrastructure territory. Yet despite all of our technology, the emotional reaction never disappeared. Humanity still fears the heavens exactly the same way it always has. The symbols changed, but the psychology remained untouched. And perhaps no modern object proves that more clearly than 99942 Apophis. It's a meteor. It's a piece of rock. An asteroid. named after the ancient Egyptian serpent of chaos itself. How convenient. A celestial object associated with darkness, destruction, and the devourer of light. The devil. A near-Earth asteroid once feared enough to trigger worldwide headlines about possible planetary impact. A massive object that passes close to Earth on Friday the 13th. A cosmic symbol arriving during a time when civilization already feels psychologically unstable. Well, tonight we're going to examine why Apophis became larger than science itself. Because this story is not really about a rock moving through space. It's about what happens to civilization when fear from the heavens collides with technological dependence, collapsing trust, artificial intelligence, economic instability, surveillance systems, and a population already exhausted by non-stop crisis narratives. Like the state of California, and every emergency happens in Washington, and chemicals are exploding and fires, we're all going to die. Well, we're going to look at Wormwood from the book of Revelation and ask why the imagery of poisoned water still resonates so deeply in the modern world. We are going to examine why billionaires are building underground continuity systems while corporations invest trillions into hyperscale data centers, and governments expand planetary defense programs at the exact same time society is flooded with existential narratives about AI, cyber warfare, pandemics, climate collapse, and unknown threats from above. The antivirus is going to kill you. We're going to examine something far more powerful than any asteroid itself. We're going to examine the fear economy. Because modern civilization no longer runs only on money. It runs on attention. It runs on anxiety. It runs on instability. It runs on permanent anticipation of the next global emergency. Cold War fear, terror fear, pandemic fear, cyber fear, AI fear, climate fear, alien fear, asteroid fear. Well, humanity has entered an age where invisible existential threats dominate the human mind. And the deeper question may not be whether Apophis ever strikes the earth. The deeper question may be why modern civilization appears emotionally and spiritually prepared for something to come from the sky. You're all looking up. Well, movies tell you don't. Because something strange is happening in the modern world. At the exact moment humanity becomes more technologically connected than ever before, society itself becomes psychologically fractured. The more systems expand, the more unstable people feel. The more data humanity collects, the less trust exists. The more civilization claims enlightenment, the more people secretly fear collapse. Meanwhile, above the Earth, an entirely new layer of control infrastructure is forming. Satellites surrounding the planet. Space militarization accelerates. AI systems increasingly depend on orbital networks. Governments discuss planetary defense openly. Billionaires race into private aerospace programs. The heavens are no longer distant to civilization. They are becoming operational territory tied directly to communication, banking, warfare, surveillance, navigation, and digital identity itself. Well, ancient civilizations once feared dragons in the heavens. Modern civilizations fear orbital objects tracked by algorithms, mathematical equations. And perhaps that is why the symbol of Wormwood still matters today. Because Revelation does not merely describe destruction. It describes bitterness entering the waters themselves. Poison entering the systems humanity depends on for life. And perhaps the modern world already understands that symbolism better than it realizes. Poisoned trust, poisoned information, poisoned systems, poisoned institutions, poisoned perception. That's the world we live in today, isn't it, folks? Civilization itself increasingly feels contaminated psychologically, spiritually, politically, and digitally. So humanity lives in an environment where truth itself feels unstable. Well, tonight's discussion is not about proving an asteroid strike or predicting the end of the world. It's about understanding why modern civilization appears primed for a celestial fear event and why ancient prophetic imagery suddenly feels emotionally relevant again in a technological age. Because perhaps the greatest revelation is not that humanity fears the heavens once more. Perhaps the greatest revelation is that humanity never stopped. Get ready, because Bruce Willis needs to get on a spaceship and drill. In comes the serpent named Apophis. Now, in 2004, astronomers discovered an asteroid that immediately captured global attention, unlike almost any near-Earth object before it. At first, the concern was scientific, crunching numbers. Early orbital calculations suggested that there was a measurable possibility that the asteroid could impact Earth in the future. Well, that alone was enough to trigger worldwide headlines because impact probabilities involving large celestial objects are almost always extremely small. The object received the designation 99942. Flip it upside down, you get 666. Let's not go there. Apophis. And from the moment the name entered public consciousness, the asteroid stopped being viewed as merely a scientific discovery. It became symbolic. We're all going to die. The reason was the name itself. Apophis is the Greek rendering of the ancient Egyptian name Apep, the serpent of chaos. In Egyptian mythology, Apep was not simply a monster or a snake-like creature. Apep represented primordial disorder itself, darkness, disillusion, the force attempting to drag creation back into chaos. Should have just named it Jeffrey Epstein. Every night, the Egyptians believed the sun god Ra traveled through the underworld while the serpent attempted to swallow the light before dawn could arrive again. Well, the rising sun symbolized order defeating chaos one more time. Every day, every 24 hours. Yep, that's right. Doughboy, I'm leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again. I don't like Ben Affleck. That's just me. In their worldview, civilization itself survived because the forces of order temporarily held back destruction. Now, the ancient symbolism mattered because names carry emotional weight even in modern civilization. Scientists may view mythological naming conventions as harmless tradition, but the human subconscious does not separate symbolism as easily as institutions assume. So stop naming it freaking devils and demons and angels. Just name it freaking what it is. Asteroid number 99942, whatever. Who gives a shit? The moment the public heard that a potentially dangerous asteroid approaching Earth was named after an ancient serpent of destruction, the object immediately crossed from astronomy into mythology. And the asteroid became emotionally charged before most people even understood its trajectory. It's going to kill us. So what? And that is where this story becomes fascinating, because modern civilization claims to operate through rationality and science, yet psychologically it still responds to symbols exactly as ancient civilizations did. Humanity still fears names. Humanity still reacts emotionally to archetypes. The public may not consciously know Egyptian mythology, but the words chaos, destruction, serpent, darkness, and apocalypse, they already exist deep inside the cultural imagination. When those ideas became attached to an object in the sky, the emotional reaction becomes far larger than the science alone. And the timing surrounding Apophis only intensified the symbolism even further. The asteroid's famous close approach occurs on Friday the 13th, 2029. A date already saturated with centuries of superstition in Western culture. Specifically, the date means nothing. Scientifically, the date means nothing. Astronomically, it's just a coincidence. Psychologically, however, it's combustible. Humanity instinctively emerges symbolism into narratives, especially during periods of uncertainty. The result was inevitable. Apophis slowly transformed from an orbital object into a modern omen. Well, what makes this even more interesting is that ancient civilizations did not separate the heavens from earthly events. The sky and society are viewed as interconnected. Kings rose beneath signs in the heavens. Nations feared eclipses before war. Celestial disturbance were interpreted as warnings tied directly to the moral and spiritual condition of civilization itself. Modern society dismisses much of that thinking publicly, yet the emotional framework still survives beneath the surface. Whenever humanity feels unstable, it begins looking upward again. And modern civilization feels deeply unstable. Wars continue spreading across multiple regions. Artificial intelligence expands faster than governments can even regulate it. Economies feel increasingly fragile. Trust in institutions like universities, well, they collapse year after year. Billionaires, they're not smart, quietly are building underground compounds while governments expand space militarization and planetary defense systems. Well, humanity lives under permanent crisis psychology. The public mind now moves from one existential threat to another without pause. Cold War fears become terror. Terror fear becomes pandemic fear. Pandemic fear evolved into cyber fear, AI fear, economic fear, climate fear, and now increasingly cosmic fear. Oh, that's why Apophis became culturally powerful. It arrived during the exact moment civilization became psychologically vulnerable to celestial narratives once again. But will our space brothers help us? The Pleiades, the tall, white, blonde, blue-eyed racists. The asteroid itself is scientifically real. Its orbit is publicly observable. Astronomers across the world continue tracking it carefully, and current models show no impact threat for at least the next century. That's 100 years. But what matters for this discussion is not whether Apophis strikes Earth. What matters is understanding why the object became emotionally larger than the data surrounding it. Because the human mind does not process threats purely through logic. We're dum-dums. It processes them through story, symbolism, memory, archetype, and fear. And God! Ancient civilizations feared dragons in the heavens because the sky represented forces beyond human control. Modern civilization fears asteroids, AI systems, orbital weapons, satellite grids, and unknown aerial phenomena for the same reason. Humanity may possess more technology than any civilization in history, yet psychologically it remains terrified of forces larger than itself, like Elon's space lasers. And perhaps that's why the name Apophis matters so much. Out of thousands of mythological names available to modern astronomy, civilization chose the ancient serpent of chaos. CERN's same chaos dancer. For the asteroid name that once appeared capable of striking the Earth. And whether intentional or unconscious, the symbolism reveals something profound about humanity itself. The scientists are stupid and have no heart. Even in the scientific age, mankind still frames its deepest fears through ancient archetypes. Stop doing that. Scientists, if you don't believe in God, stop mentioning gods. The heavens are no longer merely distant stars to modern civilization. They are becoming active territory once again. Satellites surround the Earth. Governments discuss planetary defense openly. Corporations depend on orbital infrastructure for communication, banking, logistics, warfare, and surveillance. Space itself is becoming integrated into the nervous system of civilization, and humanity is looking upward again, not simply for wonder, but for survival. And in the middle of that transformation appears a celestial object named after the ancient devourer of light. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Elon space lasers, I did some research on it. Didn't feel like a show was necessary because, there's this lady named Ashley something, and she's one of the baby mamas of Elon, and she's been saying that Elon said there's space lasers that he's putting up there. Well, guys, the laser part, it's real. But it only lasers to one communication system to another. It just transfers data faster than fiber optics. And that's why they use it. Wormwood and the bitter waters. Now, the story of Wormwood appears in one of the most mysterious and debated passages in the book of Revelation. Revelation 8 describes a sequence of trumpet judgments affecting the earth, the seas, the skies, and eventually civilization itself. Then comes a strange image that has haunted readers for centuries. A great star falls from heaven, burning like a lamp, and the name of the star is called Wormwood. Well, the text says a third of the rivers and fountains of waters become bitter, and many die because the waters are made poisonous. For generations, people have argued over whether this passage describes a literal celestial object, a spiritual symbol, a political collapse, or a layered prophetic event operating on multiple levels at once. Well, the Bible can be either or. But regardless of interpretation, one thing becomes immediately clear. The imagery centers around contamination. Something enters the systems humanity depends on for life itself, and the result is bitterness, poisoning, death, and suffering spreading outward through civilization. Well, that symbolism matters profoundly in the modern age because humanity increasingly feels surrounded by poisoned systems. We've got poisoned food. True. Poisoned information. True. Poisoned politics. True. Poisoned trust. True. Poisoned relationships. True. Poisoned economies. True. And poisoned digital environments. True. Well, the modern world already feels bitter long before any asteroid enters the discussion. And the word wormwood itself referred to a bitter plant used through Scripture as a symbol of sorrow, corruption, judgment, and affliction. Now, in the Old Testament, wormwood appears repeatedly whenever truth becomes corrupted or justice collapses. Maybe now. The prophets used it as a metaphor for societies that had drifted away from righteousness and entered moral decay. Like how we're now starting to give a voice or platform for minor attracted people who are pedophiles. Yeah, we're drifting. The prophets used it as a metaphor. Drifted away from righteousness and entered moral decay. Wormwood represented bitterness entering the land itself. Well, that's important because Revelation does not introduce wormwood out of nowhere. The symbol already exists deep within biblical language long before the apocalypse narrative appears. The people reading Revelation in the ancient world would immediately recognize wormwood as connected to judgment and corruption spread through civilization. And perhaps that is why the passage still resonates so powerfully today. We do have a lot of Christians out there. Well, lukewarm. Modern civilization lives in a constant state of contamination anxiety. Entire industries now exist around fear of toxins, chemicals, pollution, pharmaceuticals, radiation, digital manipulation, and environmental collapse. That's when you wake up every day, when you put on your armpit deodorant with heavy metals in it. Humanity no longer trusts the systems feeding it physically or psychologically. People distrust water. People distrust food. They distrust medicine. They distrust media. They distrust governments. They distrust algorithms. Civilization increasingly feels like it's drinking from poison streams while trying to determine which source can still be trusted. Can you trust CNN or Fox? Please tell us the truth. None of the above. Well, the emotional environment makes wormwood feel strongly, and startlingly modern. The Chernobyl disaster intensified this connection dramatically. After the nuclear catastrophe in 1986, many Christians noticed that the word Chernobyl referred to a plant related to wormwood. Suddenly, Revelation's imagery of poisoned waters and death became attached to a real technological disaster involving contamination spreading invisibly across land and water. Well, whether or not Chernobyl fulfilled any biblical prophecy, the symbolic overlap permanently linked the idea of Wormwood with radiation, contamination, and poison systems in the modern imagination. And perhaps that connection reveals something deeper about prophecy itself. Ancient people feared visible destruction. Modern civilization increasingly fears invisible contamination. Radiation cannot be seen. Cyber warfare cannot be seen. AI manipulation cannot be seen. Algorithm influence cannot be seen. Psychological operations cannot be seen. Data harvesting cannot be seen. Biological contamination cannot be seen. Well, the threats dominating the modern world are increasingly invisible while spreading through interconnected systems humanity depends on for survival. Now, that sounds remarkably similar to the logic embedded within the image of Wormwood. Something enters the waters, the systems become bitter, the contamination spreads. Now, people suffer because the source of life itself becomes corrupted. I didn't do it. And perhaps that is why the symbol continues to feel alive in every generation. Throughout history, people attempted to identify Wormwood with specific events. Some believed it referred to comets. Others connected it to meteors or volcanic eruptions. Some viewed it entirely symbolically as corrupted doctrine or false teachings poisoning humanity spiritually. Others saw it as a political system turning oppressive into toxic. Entire generations projected their own fears onto the passage because the imagery itself operates like a mirror reflecting whatever civilization fears most deeply at that time. Well, the modern world fears systemic collapse, not simply war. Nobody cares about war anymore, do they? Not simply invasion. Nobody gives a shit. We watch Gaza be completely destroyed by Israel. And they killed 60% of women, children, and seniors, and we didn't give a shit. But contamination spreading through interconnected systems faster than humanity can control, then we get worried. And that's what makes this discussion surrounding Apophis psychologically powerful. The asteroid itself may never impact Earth, but it revives the ancient archetype of something descending from the heavens capable of altering civilization itself. Modern humanity understands orbital mechanics scientifically, yet emotionally it still reacts as ancient civilizations did whenever strange objects appear in the sky. And now the symbolism becomes even more unsettling. At the same moment, society fears poisoned waters. Humanity increasingly depends on digital systems controlled by invisible architecture above the earth. Satellites guide communication, banking, navigation, logistics, warfare, and information itself. Civilization has become dependent upon systems most people cannot see or fully understand. The more technologically advanced the world becomes, the more psychologically vulnerable it becomes to fear involving invisible contamination and systems failure. Well, that vulnerability creates fertile ground for what could be called the fear economy. Because, hey, fear no longer spreads only through physical disasters. Fear now spreads through information networks instantly. A rumor, a headline, a video clip, or a trending narrative can contaminate millions of minds within hours. That sucks. Modern civilization increasingly experiences reality itself through mediated systems controlled by algorithms and emotional amplification. So in that sense, Wormwood may not simply describe poisoned water. It may describe poisoned perception. A civilization drinking from corrupted streams of information while slowly losing the ability to distinguish truth from contamination. And perhaps that is why the prophecy still unsettles humanity after nearly 2,000 years. The symbol of Wormwood survives because every generation eventually encounters the same terrifying realization. Civilizations do not collapse only from attack. Sometimes they collapse because the systems sustaining life become bitter from within. This is fear from the heavens. Long before satellites, telescopes, and orbital calculations existed, humanity feared the sky because the sky represented forces beyond human control. Ancient civilizations understood something modern civilization often forgets. People become psychologically unstable when they believe the heavens themselves are changing. Well, throughout history, celestial disturbances triggered panic across entire empires. Comets were associated with deaths of kings. Eclipses were viewed as warnings of judgment. Falling stars were interpreted as signs that heaven itself was speaking against nations. Entire priesthoods were built around observing the heavens because rulers believed that survival depends on correctly interpreting signs appearing above them. Well, the reason this mattered so deeply was because the ancient world did not separate earthly events from cosmic war or cosmic order. And the heavens and the earth were viewed as connected systems. When strange things appeared in the sky, civilization belonged or believed the balance between order and chaos itself was shifting. And in many ways, that ancient emotional structure never disappeared. Maybe it's in our DNA. Modern civilization publicly claims to interpret celestial events scientifically, yet emotionally, humanity still reacts with primal fear whenever the heavens appear threatening. Like everyone's telling me, I don't remember the moon going like this, the water moon. I remember maybe a few times, but it's usually always like this, and when it's a half moon, it's straight up, it's not bent. Well, the technology evolved, but the psychological response remained remarkably unchanged. Humanity still believes deeply unsettling whenever something massive, unknown, or uncontrollable approaches from above. That fear exists because the sky represents vulnerability. We've been scared of the sky since the 60s when we all decided to point nuclear weapons at each other. Human beings can defend against armies. Nations can build walls. They don't seem to like them very much. Governments can create weapon systems. But celestial threats bypass nearly every traditional structure of human control. A sufficiently large object from space does not recognize borders, militaries, ideologies, or political systems. It becomes a threat shared by civilization itself. That reality produces a unique psychological effect, unlike ordinary geopolitical conflict. And perhaps that is why fear from the heavens carries such extraordinary emotional power. Unlike war between nations, celestial threats unify humanity under a single existential framework. Let's all come together and fight the asteroids. The Cold War divided East and West. Terrorism divided nations politically. Economic collapse affects regions differently, but a major object descending from space instantly becomes planetary in scale. While every nation watches the same sky, every population feels vulnerable simultaneously. Thus, fear itself becomes globalized. Well, that dynamic is extremely important in the modern age because civilization increasingly operates through global banking systems rather than isolated national systems. Banking, communication, shipping, energy, satellites, data, and AI, all these networks, they all function internationally. Humanity has become interconnected psychologically and technologically in ways no previous civilization ever experienced. So it's a new thing. And as a result, modern fears increasingly operate on planetary levels. Pandemics, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, climate instability, orbital warfare, or asteroid impacts. Well, these are not local fears, they're civilization-level fears. And the more interconnected humanity becomes, the more psychologically sensitive civilization becomes to narratives involving global existential threats. And this is where the symbol of Apophis becomes culturally powerful. The asteroid arrived during a period when humanity already felt overwhelmed by instability. Public trust in institutions declined rapidly, governments appeared increasingly divided, information war intensified, artificial intelligence accelerated faster than social structures could even adapt, economies became dependent on invisible digital systems most people barely understood. Meanwhile, billionaires quietly constructed underground compounds while governments expanded space militarization and planetary defense initiatives. Well, the result was a civilization already psychologically primed for fear from above. And history shows that societies often become spiritually vulnerable during periods of uncertainty. Ancient civilizations interpreted celestial disturbances as signs because they believed disorder in the heavens reflected disorder on earth. And whether scientifically accurate or not, the emotional logic remains extremely powerful even today. Modern humanity still instinctively associates the sky with forces greater than itself. And that is why films, books, and media repeatedly return to the same themes: alien invasions, planet-killing asteroids, solar catastrophes, orbital warfare, cosmic extinction-level events. Modern entertainment continually rehearses scenarios involving fear descending from above because the archetype itself is deeply rooted in human consciousness. The heavens remain psychologically sacred territory even within secular societies. But there is another layer to this discussion that may be even more important. In ancient civilization, the heavens represented divine territory beyond human control. Modern civilization is attempting to turn the heavens into controllable infrastructure. Satellites now surround the Earth. Communication systems depend on orbital grids. GPS systems guide transportation, banking, military operations, agriculture, logistics, and commerce. Governments openly discuss asteroid deflection technologies and planetary defense systems. Private corporations race to dominate space launch infrastructure. Entire military branches now focus specifically on orbital warfare and satellite protection. Protection from what? From the boogeyman rocks. Humanity is no longer merely observing the heavens. Humanity is integrating the heavens directly into civilization's operational nervous system. And that transformation changes the psychological meaning of celestial threats entirely. In the ancient world, people feared gods in the heavens. In the modern world, people fear system failure in the heavens. But emotionally, the two fears overlap far more than modern society can even admit. Because when civilization becomes dependent upon invisible infrastructure above the earth, the heavens once again become tied directly to survival itself. And perhaps that is why the modern world increasingly feels anxious about objects in the sky, not merely because of science, but because civilization subconsciously understands how fragile its interconnected systems truly are. Look, humanity built a world dependent on invisible architecture, while simultaneously losing trust in the institutions controlling it. That ain't good. Well, that combination creates enormous psychological instability. Fear spreads faster in societies already exhausted by uncertainty. Every strange event becomes amplified. Every unexplained object becomes symbolic. Every celestial narrative becomes emotionally charged because people already feel civilization balancing on the edge of disorder. And perhaps that is the deeper reason celestial fear returns repeatedly throughout history. The heavens remind humanity of its limitations. No matter how advanced civilizations become, mankind remains deeply aware that it cannot fully control the forces surrounding it. Technology may create the illusion of mastery, but objects from space, cosmic events, and celestial uncertainty continue to remind humanity that it is still vulnerable. Ancient civilizations feared dragons in the sky because they believed chaos could descend from above at any moment. Modern civilization tracks asteroid with AI systems for the exact same reason. Now, modern civilization discovered something ancient empires understood a long time ago. Fear is one of the most powerful organizing forces on Earth. Fear changes behavior faster than logic can. Fear centralizes authority faster than persuasion. Fear reshapes populations faster than education. When people believe survival itself is threatened, they willingly surrender freedoms, privacy, stability, and independent thought in exchange for security. And perhaps that is why modern civilization increasingly feels trapped inside permanent crisis. For the last century, folks, humanity has moved from one existential fear narrative directly into another. World wars created fear of annihilation between nations. The Cold War introduced the permanent fear of nuclear destruction hanging over civilization itself. Then came terrorism, biological threats, pandemics, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, climate change, climate collapse, and now increasingly fear tied to the heavens themselves. Well, the modern public mind rarely experiences peace anymore. Well, peace doesn't sell. Society exists in a state of continuous anticipation, waiting for the next global emergency. And that's not accidental in the sense of media behavior, institutional incentives, and economic structure. Fear generates attention. Attention generates profit. Profit generates power. Entire industries now depend on maintaining public emotional engagement through crisis narratives. It's Society 101 now, folks. Get used to it. News networks, political systems, social media algorithms, defense contractors, cybersecurity industries, pharmaceutical companies, and digital surveillance platforms all expand during periods of uncertainty on fear. Now, this does not mean that every threat is fake. Most are. That's where many people lose balance. Wars are real. Terrorism is real. Pandemics are real, sort of. Cyber attacks are real. Artificial intelligence generally could disrupt civilization dramatically. The important issue is not whether threats exist. The important issue is understanding how fear surrounds those threats becomes economically and politically useful to the bankers. Because modern civilization increasingly operates through what could be called emotional economics. Now, social media platforms profit from outrage and anxiety because emotionally charged content spreads faster than calm analysis. News systems amplify instability because fear captures attention longer than stability. Political movements gain support by convincing populations that catastrophe is approaching unless extraordinary action is taken immediately. Entire economies now function through psychological stimulation rather than simple material production. Well, fear itself becomes infrastructure, and that changes civilization profoundly. It's turning us into assholes. The human nervous system was not designed for permanent crisis exposure. Ancient populations experienced periods of war and famine, but they also experienced long stretches where information traveled slowly and emotional recovery was possible. Modern civilization receives a global crisis information every hour of every day. A war on one side of the planet appears instantly on screens everywhere, and financial panic spreads globally within minutes. Viral narratives move faster than governments can even respond. Civilization lives inside a nonstop psychological storm created by interconnected information systems. And the result is exhaustion. People become overwhelmed. Trust collapses. Attention fragments. Communities weaken. Reality itself begins to feel unstable. And once populations become psychologically exhausted, they become easier to influence through fear-based narratives because people no longer feel capable of independently evaluating every threat presented to them. It's pretty simple. For me, I just don't freak out when I read these headlines or when I see a doom video. Like, oh, okay, here we go again. That's where the fear economy becomes extraordinarily powerful. A frightened population seeks protection. A confused population seeks authority. An exhausted population seeks certainty. In comes Elon Musk and Bruce Willis leaving on a jet plane. Gonna drill, baby, drill in the asteroid to save humanity. Throughout history, rulers understood this instinctively. Ancient kingdoms often centralized power during war, during plague, famine, or external threats because population tolerates stronger control during periods of fear. Modern civilization operates similarly through digital systems rather than purely military systems. And surveillance expands during crisis. Emergency powers increase. Censorship becomes easier to justify. Public resistance weakens when people believe survival itself is at stake. And perhaps that explains why modern threats increasingly operate at existential scales. Modern or Cold War fear threatened nuclear annihilation. Terrorism threatened public safety. Pandemics threaten biological survival. Cyber warfare threatens infrastructure. And artificial intelligence threatens economic stability and identity itself because they got your data. Celestial events, they threaten civilization from above. And each new fear comes closer toward total system vulnerability. The public begins feeling that nowhere is truly safe anymore, Where can you move to? It's all corrupt. And this is where the discussion surrounding Apophis becomes psychologically significant. Whether consciously or unconsciously, the asteroid taps directly into humanity's oldest fear archetypes. Fear from the heavens bypass ordinary political divisions because celestial threats affect everyone simultaneously. A war can remain regional, and economic collapse may affect nations unevenly, but a major object from space instantly becomes global psychologically. And that creates immense narrative power. The public sees government discussing planetary defense while billionaires build underground compounds and bunkers, and corporations invest heavily into continuity infrastructures like hyperscale data centers, satellite grids, AI systems, and private aerospace programs. Anything to just pump more money into something. It'll never stop. They're generating the narrative over and over. You say they. Well, I have my ideas. I have my thoughts on it, but I can't really prove it. But I can say they. I can just call them the bankers, the money changers, the ones Jesus fashioned a whip and kicked out of the temple of God. At the same time, society experiences increasing instability across economics, politics, technology, and information itself. And the result is a civilization already conditioned to expect catastrophic disruption eventually. We're all waiting for it. Everyone is just begging to just get it over with. But after it comes, you're not going to believe the next narrative after 10 years, then they're going to create a new one. It never stops. And perhaps that expectation is the most important part of the fear economy itself. Because once populations emotionally anticipate collapse, every event becomes interpreted through apocalyptic frameworks. Storms become signs. Economic instability becomes evidence of systemic failure. Artificial intelligence becomes a potential replacement for humanity. Objects in the sky become symbols of judgment or extinction. While the emotional environment itself changes how reality is interpreted. This is why modern civilization increasingly feels spiritually anxious even in high technological societies. Humanity built extraordinary systems while simultaneously losing psychological stability. And the more interconnected the world became, the more fragile people began to feel. Civilization expanded technology while becoming emotionally exhausted internally. I think by design. And perhaps that's why the symbol of Wormwood continues to resonate today. Because Wormwood is not simply about destruction from above. It's about bitterness entering the system sustaining civilization itself. It's about contamination spreading through the waters that people depend upon for life. And in the modern world, the waters are no longer only physical, because information is now water. Media is water. Digital systems are water. Psychological narratives are water. Modern civilization drinks constantly from streams it no longer trusts. And perhaps that is the true terror hidden inside the fear economy. The danger is not merely that humanity fears collapse. The danger is that civilization may become so psychologically exhausted by permanent fear that it eventually accepts almost any system promising safety from the chaos. Remember Wernher von Braun, The Last Card Carol? Well, one of the most controversial stories connected to modern fear from the heavens comes from claims made by Carol Rosen, a former associate of rocket engineer Wernher von Braun, the Nazi. According to Rosen, von Braun warned her near the end of his life that global threats would emerge in stages, each one used to justify increasingly militarization and centralized control. And the sequence she later repeated publicly became famous in conspiracy and disclosure communities. First the Russians, then the terrorists, and men in caves, then rogue nations, then asteroids, and then finally, Carol, the final card, aliens. Now, Rosen claimed von Braun specifically warned that fear from space would eventually become the ultimate justification for space-based weapon systems. The quote spread widely because people noticed something unsettling about the progression itself. The Cold War dominated global fear for decades, and after the Soviet Union collapsed, terrorism became the defining threat narrative. Then came rogue states, cyber warfare, then pandemics, artificial intelligence, and growing discussions surrounding unidentified aerial phenomena and planetary defense systems. Whether Rosen's account is fully accurate or not, the reason the story survived is because it touches something psychologically real about modern civilization. Humanity increasingly organizes itself around existential fear. And the larger the perceived threat, the easier it is to justify extraordinary systems of control, surveillance, spending, and militarization. And this is where this discussion becomes important to handle very carefully. There's no verified evidence proving a staged alien event or fabricated asteroid threat is going to happen. That distinction matters. It is easy for emotionally charged narratives to outrun evidence. But at the same time, history clearly shows that governments, militaries, corporations, and intelligence systems often use fear strategically to shape public behavior. Propaganda does exist. Psychological operations exist. Media manipulation exists. True. Information warfare exists, and none of those realities require belief in elaborate science fiction scenarios to recognize that fear remains one of the most effective tools for influencing populations. What makes von Braun's alleged warning so powerful is not necessarily the literal claim itself, it's the emotional pattern hidden inside it. Yeah, Jews print unlimited money. Yeah, this is just another psyop stream. Go away. Human civilization appears to move from one global fear framework into another larger one. Each threat becomes more planetary, more invisible, and more psychologically overwhelming than the last. Nuclear annihilation threatens nations. Terrorism threatens public safety. Cyber warfare threatens infrastructure. Artificial intelligence threatens economic identity and reality itself. Celestial threats threaten civilization from above. They do. While that scale keeps increasing. And perhaps that's why stories involving Apophis, Wormwood, and fear from the heavens resonate so strongly today. Modern civilization already feels unstable. People increasingly distrust governments, media systems, financial systems, and even information itself. In that environment, any global sky-based narrative instantly carries enormous emotional power because populations are already psychologically exhausted and expected disruption. That's what they feel. That's what they think it's coming. That's how it works. And the deeper issue may not be whether a final card exists at all. The deeper issue may be that civilization itself has become conditioned to anticipate one. While the public is distracted by nonstop political conflict and digital noise, something unusual has quietly accelerated behind the scenes. Billionaires, technology executives, hedge fund managers, and elite investors have increasingly invested in underground shelters, remote compounds. Oh, they have. Private security infrastructure, farmland, water access, and self-sustaining continuity systems. From New Zealand estates to hardened bunkers beneath the United States, the people benefiting the most from the modern system appear increasingly concerned about the stability of the world that they helped create. It's kind of a catch-22. Well, that contradiction matters. Publicly, modern civilization projects confidence in technology. Artificial intelligence promises efficiency. Digital systems promise convenience. Global connectivity promises progress. Yet privately, many of the individuals building these systems behave as though they expect serious instability ahead. The question is not whether bunkers themselves are irrational. Well, wealthy people have always prepared for uncertainty. Kings built fortresses, empires stored grain, powerful families created escape routes during times of collapse. And the deeper question is why? Why modern elites increasingly appear focused on continuity and survival simultaneously with rapid technological expansion? Part of the answer is simple: risk management. The modern world depends on fragile systems layered tightly together. Electrical grids, satellite networks, digital banking, AI infrastructure, cloud computing, container shipping, water systems, and global logistics, they all depend on constant coordination. And a major cyber attack, grid failure, pandemic, financial seizure, chemical spill, or geopolitical conflict could disrupt normal life extremely quickly. Well, the COVID era exposed that fragility more clearly than many expected. And let me tell you, just watching the director of WHO in front of the people, like about ready to explode in his pants because of how horny he is for the next pandemic. It's absolutely insane how sick these people are. Many elites likely saw those events as proof that modern civilization is less stable than it appears to be on the surface. But there's another layer that cannot be ignored here, folks. Many of the same industries driving bunker construction are also driving digital dependence itself. Social media systems reshape human behavior. Artificial intelligence threatens labor stability. Surveillance infrastructure expands continuously. Housing grows unaffordable. Information warfare intensifies. Entire populations become psychologically fragmented by algorithmic systems optimized for engagement rather than truth or social stability. Well, in other words, some of the people preparing most aggressively for instability are deeply connected to the technologies transforming civilization itself. They're hypocrites. And that reality creates public suspicion because it feels contradictory. If the future is truly stable and prosperous, why are the architects of the modern world increasingly focused on continuity planning, private security, and underground survival systems? Well, this does not prove foreknowledge of a specific catastrophe, but it is important to say this clearly. But it does reveal something psychological. Confidence inside elite circles appear lower than public messaging suggests. And the bunker trend reflects a growing awareness that technological civilization may be far more fragile than most populations even realize. And perhaps that's why fear from the heavens resonates so strongly now. Apophis is going to kill us all. Humanity already senses instability beneath the surface of modern life. Economic systems feel stretched. Digital systems feel invasive. Artificial intelligence accelerates rapidly. Governments openly discuss cyber warfare, orbital defense, and continuity planning over and over and over and over and over again. And the public sees the world becoming more technologically powerful while simultaneously feeling less secure emotionally. Well, that combination creates fertile ground for apocalyptic thinking. Remember when Trump went to the United Nations and said, no more are we going to be doing apocalypse economies? Ancient civilizations built temples and fortresses, and I'm not saying Trump's wrong or right. I don't like the guy. I don't like any presidents because they're all selected and not elected. Ancient civilizations built temples and fortresses above ground as symbols of confidence and permanence. Modern civilization increasingly builds hidden infrastructure underground while surrounding the planet with invisible infrastructure above it. Hell, even the Bible says, to the rocks fall upon us because they're scared of the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ. Satellites fill the skies while bunkers disappear beneath the earth. Humanity appears caught between fear from below and fear from above at the exact same moment. And perhaps that is the deeper symbolism hidden inside the bunker phenomenon itself. It's not merely about survival, it's about civilization quietly losing faith in its own stability. Now, for most of human history, the heavens represented mystery. Ancient civilizations looked upward and saw stars, gods, omens, and divine order beyond human reach. But modern civilization is transforming the heavens into something entirely different. Space is no longer simply observed. Space is becoming operational territory directly connected to the survival of modern civilization itself. Well, satellites now surround the Earth in massive numbers. Communication systems depend on them. Banking systems depend on them. Military targeting systems depend on them. GPS coordinates, guides, shipping, agriculture, aviation, emergency services, and global logistics, all through orbital infrastructure most people rarely think about. Entire economies now function through invisible systems floating above the planet. Well, that transformation changes humanity psychologically. In the ancient world, people feared the heavens because they believed supernatural forces lived up there. The Bible says they do. And in the modern world, people fear the heavens because civilization itself increasingly depends on infrastructure placed there. Satellites. The fear evolved from mythology into systems vulnerability, but emotionally from the results felt remarkably similar. As humanity once feared gods in the sky, now it fears losing the orbital architecture sustaining modern life. What a conundrum. And that fear is accelerating because the heavens are becoming militarized. Governments openly discuss orbital warfare, anti-satellite weapons, cyber attacks against space infrastructure, and planetary defense systems. Nations increasingly view space not as exploration territory, but as a strategic territory. And the modern battlefield no longer ends at borders or oceans. It now ends in the orbit itself. That's true. And at the same time, private corporations race to dominate space infrastructure. Elon! Satellite constellations expand rapidly, private launch systems multiply, artificial intelligence increasingly integrates with orbital surveillance and targeting systems. Communication networks become more dependent on cloud systems tied directly to space-based architecture. And humanity is quietly building a permanent digital layer around the Earth. And perhaps that is one of the strangest developments of the modern age. Because ancient civilizations built towers trying to reach the heavens. Modern civilizations surround the Earth with technological systems attempting to control them. Has nothing to do with space exploration. Has everything to do with mind control. And this is where the symbolism surrounding Apophis and the Wormwood, because culturally it's powerful. The heavens no longer feel distant to civilization. They feel connected directly to survival, economics, communication, and control. As society becomes more dependent on invisible systems above the Earth, celestial fear becomes psychologically amplified because the public subconsciously understands how fragile interconnected infrastructure truly is. Look, a solar event could disrupt systems. It could. A cyber attack against satellites could disrupt systems. Orbital warfare could disrupt systems. A major asteroid narrative could disrupt systems psychologically, even without physical impact. Modern civilization increasingly feels vulnerable to threats operating beyond ordinary human visibility. And perhaps that is why space-based narratives now dominate culture so heavily. Asteroids, aliens, orbital warfare, satellite grids, planetary defense, artificial intelligence, and cosmic catastrophe repeatedly appear across media because the heavens themselves are becoming integrated into humanity's psychological framework once again. Well, the difference is not that ancient civilizations viewed the heavens spiritually while modern civilization views them technologically. No. Yet both ultimately reveal the same truth. Humanity remains deeply unsettled by forces larger than itself. And the more civilization expands its systems into the heavens, the more emotionally vulnerable it becomes to fear descending from above. Look at what the Pope just recently said. Leo the Lion, we have to shut AI down. And now they're building the data center ark. The ark that'll save us. We need to save the data because we're all going to die from Bruce Willis's Asteroid. As fear and instability spread across the modern world, another massive construction project quietly accelerates behind the scenes, and they're spending trillions. Governments, corporations, and technology giants are building enormous hyperscale data centers across carefully selected regions of the planet. Now, these facilities consume staggering amounts of electricity, water, cooling infrastructure, fiber, and land because they now function as the nervous system of modern civilization. Artificial intelligence depends on it, cloud computing, banking, surveillance, military logistics, communication. They all increasingly, and even civilization, depend on it. That really changes how infrastructure is viewed entirely. In previous generations, oil fields, ports, railways, and factories represented strategic power, while in the modern age, data centers increasingly represent continuity itself. Whoever controls the servers controls communication, commerce, information, and increasingly perception. It's true. Look, the locations become selected matter. Northern Virginia became one of the largest data center corridors on Earth because of power availability, fiber, government proximity, and network redundancy. Texas continues expanding rapidly because of energy access and land availability. Phoenix, Ohio, Tennessee, Singapore, Frankfurt, London, and other global hubs are receiving enormous investment simultaneously. These are not temporary projects. They are long-term continuity systems designed to support the future architecture of civilization. They want to build something that can peer into the future, and they're going to use your data to do it. And they're probably scaring us with asteroids to keep us looking towards asteroids and not towards the fucking data centers. And that's why some people increasingly analyze these regions as modern arks. Not arks carrying animals through floodwaters, but digital arks carrying the operational memory of civilization itself. Humanity is effectively attempting to preserve communication, identity, commerce, intelligence, and control within hardened technological infrastructure capable of surviving instability. And perhaps that reveals something profound about the modern age. Ancient civilizations stored sacred scrolls in temples. Modern civilization stores civilization inside server farms. The public often imagines data centers as harmless internet storage, but in reality, they are becoming critical survival infrastructure. Artificial intelligence models are trained there. Financial systems process transactions there. Government cloud systems operate there. Military communications move through them. Entire populations now intersect and interact with reality through platforms connected to these facilities. And the government has been caught using Amazon servers. That means the placement of data centers reveals something important about long-term expectations. Corporations do not spend billions building hyperscale infrastructure in regions that they expect to become immediately uninhabitable by, a meteor. Power stability, climate considerations, political stability, connectivity, water access, and security, they all factor heavily into site selection. In other words, the map of modern data centers quietly reveals where the system expects continuity. So, all those cities I named above, no meteors hitting those areas. And that becomes extremely interesting when placed beside rising fear narratives involving cyber warfare, climate collapse, AI disruption, and celestial threats, like meteors. Now, at the same moment, civilization becomes psychologically unstable. The technological core of the world is being consolidated into increasingly protected infrastructure corridors. The public experiences fragmentation while the digital nervous system becomes more centralized and hardened. Well, this creates a strange contradiction. Humanity feels increasingly disconnected emotionally while becoming more interconnected technologically than ever before. Remember, Dr. Google, we know everything. We're all doctors now. We're all PhDs. Now, thanks to AI, individuals lose trust in institutions while simultaneously becoming dependent upon invisible systems controlled by those same fucking institutions. The result is a civilization that feels psychologically fractured while operating through tightly integrated digital architecture. And perhaps that is why the symbol of Wormwood still feels relevant, because Revelation describes bitterness entering the system sustaining life itself. In the modern world, the systems sustaining civilization are no longer only physical. They are informational, digital, algorithmic, and psychological. Well, data becomes water. Our algorithms become rivers. Networks become lifelines. And now civilization drinks constantly from streams controlled by infrastructure most people never see. Well, could Wormwood be symbolic? One of the greatest mistakes people make when studying prophecy is assuming every symbol must operate only one way. Throughout Scripture, prophetic language often works simultaneously on physical spirituality, politics, and psychological levels at the same time. And that's why debates surrounding Wormwood have lasted for centuries, hundreds of years. Some interpret it as a literal celestial impact. Others view it as spiritual corruption, poison doctrine, collapsing empires, or systemic judgment spreading through civilization itself. And perhaps the reason the symbol survives is because every generation eventually experiences bitterness entering the system sustaining life. While ancient civilizations experienced corruption, kings, and collapsing kingdoms, corrupted kings, collapsing kingdoms. Modern civilization experiences corrupted information systems, manipulated perception, digital addiction, propaganda saturation, and psychological exhaustion. Well, this form changes, but the underlying condition remains remarkably similar. That is why Wormwood may be more terrifying as a symbol than as a literal asteroid, because modern civilization increasingly feels poison from within. People no longer know what information to trust. Images can be generated artificially, voices can be cloned, news can be manipulated instantly, algorithms shape perception and visibility. Well, artificial intelligence increasingly blurs the boundary between reality and simulation. So humanity now lives inside a digital environment where truth itself becomes unstable. And perhaps that is why and what poisoned waters would look like in a technological civilization. In the ancient world, water represented survival, cleansing, and truth, rivers sustaining entire civilizations. Whoever controlled water controlled life itself. Well, in the modern world, language functions similarly. Language, information. Humanity now drinks constantly from streams of media, algorithms, digital platforms, and networked systems, shaping emotional reality every hour of every day. If those streams become corrupted, civilization itself becomes psychologically unstable, and I think that's where we are now. That process already appears underway, and people increasingly live inside separate realities generated by informational ecosystems. Entire populations consume completely different versions of truth depending on the algorithms feeding them. Anger spreads faster than wisdom, fear spreads faster than discernment, lies spread faster than verification. Modern civilization has become emotionally programmable because information systems now shape perception continuously. Hey, and that creates an unsettling possibility. Perhaps wormwood is not merely something that falls from the sky. Perhaps wormwood is what happens when civilization itself becomes bitter through poisoned perception. This is where the discussion surrounding Apophis becomes symbolically powerful, regardless of whether the asteroid ever even threatens Earth physically. The object acts as an archetype awakening ancient fears already buried deep inside the human mind. And fear from the heavens merges with fear from technology, fear from collapsing systems, and fear from manipulated reality itself. Well, the result of a civilization psychologically preparing for a catastrophe long before any catastrophe actually arrives. That's the result. And perhaps that is the deeper danger of the fear economy. Continuous exposure to existential narratives changes how populations interpret reality. People begin expecting collapse everywhere that they look. Every event becomes apocalyptic. Every disruption feels prophetic. Every strange object in the sky becomes emotionally amplified because society itself already feels unstable internally. Well, that emotional environment creates extraordinary vulnerability because civilizations do not collapse only from physical destruction. Sometimes they collapse because populations lose trust in reality itself. And once truth becomes fragmented, fear spreads rapidly through uncertainty. And once fear dominates perception, people become increasingly willing to surrender freedom, privacy, discernment, and independent judgment in exchange for stability. Well, in that sense, wormwood may ultimately represent a civilization drinking from poisoned streams of data, while no longer realizing that the contamination is already inside the system. So modern civilization lives in a strange emotional tension that previous generations rarely experienced at this scale. Humanity possesses more technology, more information, more communication systems, and more scientific knowledge than any civilization in history that we know of. Yet people increasingly feel anxious, unstable, exhausted, and uncertain about the future. Well, they don't have Jesus. The modern world projects power outward while internally struggling with fear, fragmentation, and loss of trust. And perhaps that is why humanity keeps looking upward again. Not because people suddenly abandon science, but because civilization feels itself psychologically vulnerable. The public sense is that modern systems are fragile, even while appearing technologically advanced. Economies feel unstable. Artificial intelligence advances faster than social structures can adapt. Information systems distort reality continuously. Governments openly discuss cyber warfare, orbital defense, and planetary continuity planning, while billionaires quietly prepare private survival infrastructure underground. Bunkers. Hey, what's his name? Zuckerberg. He created an underground bunker in his Hawaii flat. The result is a civilization emotionally prepared for disruption. And that does not mean a celestial catastrophe is guaranteed. It does not mean Apophis is wormwood or that prophecy should be reduced to simplistic predictions. But it does reveal something important about the conditions of modern humanity. People increasingly expect a global event capable of reshaping civilization itself. And the public mind has become conditioned toward anticipation. And perhaps that is why celestial narratives carry such enormous emotional power now. Fear from the heavens bypasses ordinary political division because it affects humanity psychologically as a single civilization. Wars divide nations, economies divide classes, politics divides populations, but objects descending from the sky create a different emotional response entirely. The heavens remind humanity that all civilizations remain vulnerable regardless of technology, ideology, or power. Ancient civilizations understood this instinctively. They believed the heavens reflected the spiritual condition of the earth itself. When kingdoms become corrupt or unstable, people expected signs from above. Modern civilizations dismisses much of that thinking publicly, yet emotionally it still reacts the same way whenever the sky appears threatening. And now something unprecedented is happening. For the first time in human history, prophecy, artificial intelligence, Global infrastructure and global surveillance systems, orbital infrastructure, psychological warfare, and planetary fear all exist simultaneously inside the same interconnected civilization. So humanity is not merely observing the heavens anymore. Humanity is building systems into the heavens while emotionally fearing what may come down from them. Well, that paradox defines the modern age. And the more technology's advanced civilization becomes, the more psychologically fragile it appears internally. Humanity built digital systems capable of connecting billions of people instantly, yet loneliness increases. Humanity built information systems capable of storing nearly all human knowledge, yet truth itself feels unstable. Humanity itself built global communication networks, yet trust collapses faster than ever before. And perhaps that is why the symbol of Wormwood remains so powerful today, because bitterness already entered the system of civilization long before any object fell from the fucking sky. Bitterness entered politics, media, communities, information systems. Bitterness entered human perception itself. The modern world increasingly feels contaminated psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and digitally. Humanity no longer fears only physical destruction, it fears losing reality itself. And that may be the true reason Apophis captured the imagination of the modern world. The asteroid became a mirror reflecting civilization's deeper anxiety about instability, fragility, and loss of control. The public, they see governments discussing planetary defense while simultaneously struggling to maintain order on Earth itself. Humanity now watches the heavens through satellites, AI, orbital trackers, and digital simulations while carrying the same ancient fear buried deep inside every civilization before it. Fear that something larger than mankind still exists beyond human control. And perhaps that is the final truth hidden inside all of this. Ancient civilizations feared dragons in the heavens because they believed chaos would descend from above at any moment. Modern civilization tracks meteors, asteroids, militarizes space, and builds planetary defense systems for exactly the same reason. And the language changed, but the technology didn't. Well, the language changed and the technology changed, but humanity itself did not change. The heavens still reveal the limits of human control, and mankind is still afraid. They're scared. So to conclude, for thousands of years, humanity believed the heavens carried messages greater than kings, governments, and empires. Ancient civilizations feared comets, eclipses, falling stars, and strange objects in the sky because they understood something modern civilization often tries to ignore: that mankind is not fully in control of the world surrounding it. Technology may create the illusion of mastery, but the heavens still remind humanity of its limits. Modern civilization claims to interpret the sky scientifically now, yet emotionally humanity reacts exactly as it always has. The symbols changed, but the fear remained. Ancient people feared dragons in the heavens. Modern people fear asteroids, orbital warfare, artificial intelligence, satellite collapse, and unknown objects tracked by machines above the Earth. Humanity still looks upward during the times of uncertainty, searching for meaning, warning, or judgment. That's why 99942, Apophis, the asteroid, became larger than science itself. The asteroid entered public consciousness at the exact same moment civilization already felt psychologically unstable. Economic systems feel fragile. Artificial intelligence accelerates beyond public understanding. Trust in governments, media, and institutions continue collapsing. Billionaires are creating bunkers, continuity systems. Massive digital infrastructures are also being designed to preserve the operational nervous system of civilization itself. Well, at the same time, the modern world increasingly operates through fear. Fear of war, terrorism, pandemics, cyber collapse, artificial intelligence, environmental disaster, and fear from the heavens themselves. Thus, civilization now exists inside a permanent state of emotional anticipation, waiting for the next global crisis. And the modern economy no longer runs only on production and commerce. The modern economy now increasingly runs on anxiety, attention, instability, and psychological engagement. Humanity became emotionally exhausted while becoming more technologically connected than ever before. I think by design. And perhaps that is why the image of Wormwood from the book of Revelation still resonates so deeply, because the modern world already feels poisoned long before any object falls from the sky. Poisoned information, poisoned trust, poisoned politics, perceptions, communities, and poisoned systems. Civilization increasingly drinks from streams it no longer trusts while trying to determine what reality itself even is anymore. Nobody even knows if they're a boy or a girl. Artificial intelligence blurs the boundary between truth and simulation. Algorithms shape perception invisibly. Fear spreads faster than discernment. Humanity built digital rivers carrying information across the planet, yet those same rivers increasingly carry bitterness, division, confusion, and manipulation alongside knowledge itself. I didn't do it. Perhaps that is the deeper warning hidden inside the symbolism of Wormwood. The danger may not simply be physical destruction from above. The danger may be a civilization becoming spiritually, psychologically, and informationally contaminated from within while searching desperately for safety, certainty, and control. Perfect for a new world order. This broadcast was never about proving an asteroid strike or predicting the end of the world. It was about understanding the emotional condition of modern humanity. A civilization surrounding itself with satellite surveillance systems, AI infrastructures, orbital weapons, and planetary defense programs, while simultaneously fearing collapse from every direction. Humanity has entered an age where prophecy, technology, psychology, media, and existential fear are all beginning to merge into one environment. And perhaps that's why the heavens above matter again. Not because mankind suddenly became primitive. No. Not because science failed. No. But because the sky still reminds humanity of something it cannot escape. No civilization, no empire, no technological system, and no human structure has ever fully conquered fear itself. The heavens still humble mankind. The heavens still expose human fragility. And deep beneath all that technology, modern civilization remains exactly what ancient civilizations were before it. A people looking upward during uncertain times, wondering if something is coming from above.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the Breath War, the Crown of Blood, and the Ritual Machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.